Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin through the lens of the ISM. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, we covered this briefly in the video yesterday, but I think it deserves a dedicated video. And the reason why is because it helps us to understand the lack of retail involvement this cycle when you think about the difference of Main Street and Wall Street. Now, politicians historically tend to want to please the people on Wall Street, unfortunately to the detriment of the people on Main Street. And a lot of people realized this and decided to become investors, right? Because otherwise they get left behind. Now, the problem this cycle is that Main Street has been hurting. People, just everyday people that run businesses, that go to work, that maybe aren't as interested in investing, but they still contribute a lot to society, right? It's like the backbone of society. They've been hurting, whether it's due to inflation, whether it's due to AI fears, whether it's due to higher for longer and tighter monetary policy. Who knows what the reason is? But when you look at the price of Bitcoin, there's an interesting metric you can look at, and that's this one right here. It's the ISM. Now, what is the ISM? The ISM, you can see here on this website, so we're looking at the United States ISM Manufacturing PMI. It's the manufacturing purchaser manager. It's the purchasing managers index, right? It's a purchasing managers index, and if it's above 50, it means that we're in expansion. If it's below 50, it means we're in contraction, and it indicates just overall the health of the economy. And so what you'll notice is that over the last say 10 years, there's been periods of boom times and then other periods where it goes through a bust phase. But what's interesting is when you look at the price of Bitcoin and you overlay the ISM onto the chart, what do you see? What do you see? You see pretty clearly that major peaks by Bitcoin have corresponded to peaks in the ISM, right? You can pretty clearly see that. Clear as day. So the reason why, when you look at something like the social interest, the reason why it's effectively been zero this cycle, Main Street's hurting. That's why this cycle feels so different. Right? That's why there hasn't been any euphoria, because Main Street is hurting. And you could argue the reason why the ISM is staying below 50, you could argue it's because the Fed funds rate is still higher than the neutral rate. The Fed funds rate is currently at 4%. The neutral rate, some people think it's as low as 3%. No one really knows. I tend to take the 2-year yield as a good approximation, which is around 3.6%. You could argue that if the Fed were to come out and cut by 50 basis points, we'd be below the neutral rate. But they're probably not going to do that. In fact, if you look at expectations for what the Fed's going to do in December, last I checked, it was a coin flip. It's coin flip. And even if they cut 25 basis points, that's still not enough theoretically to get below this abstract neutral rate, because it's the 2-year yield's at 3.6%, and some people think it's below 3.6. Some people say it's at 3. No one really knows, but that's why when you think about that comparison we made in, I'm sure you guessed it, 2019, what happened? What happened in 2019? We had a top, but retail never came back because Main Street was hurting. And then we had a recession, a pandemic-induced recession. The money printers turned back on, and Main Street came back. Retail came back. So you could argue that we are doing the same thing. And what we need to really get things moving again is a scare that would allow for much looser monetary policy, or simply for Jerome Powell to be replaced as chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm going to say something controversial, but I don't think it should be. But it's my channel, so I will say it. I think Jerome Powell's done a pretty good job. How do you blame him? I mean, the S&P was just at new highs not too long ago. If you had done what his critics would have said to do, you would have been cutting rates back in 2022. So I think Powell did what needed to be done, frankly. Now, could they start cutting rates more now? I think you could argue that. But I also don't think you can look at what Powell did over the last few years and criticize him too strongly for it, right? Like, he did what he thought he needed to do. And yes, it's caused some pain, but what was the alternative? Just cut rates to zero, print money, and have milk cost $10 a gallon? I mean, like, what's the alternative there? So I do wonder if we're going to go into a period, where there's like a little bit of waning interest as we get into early 2026. But as interest rates come down and monetary policy starts to change, you could end up getting sort of that next phase of the business cycle. But we're not there yet, right? Like, you could argue that this 2019 top on the ISM was basically the same as the one we got in 2025. And then it went down. There was a big scare, and then everything changed. So if you keep going back to this idea of like, why does it feel so different, right? Like, yeah, Bitcoin did what it always does. Bitcoin, if you look at the ROI from the low, what more could you have asked for this cycle? In fact, if I had asked you 3 years ago to draw out a potential path for the market cycle ROI, is there not a chance you would have drawn out exactly that purple line? But yet we sit here and say, well, why does it feel so different? It feels so different because only the blue chips rallied. The other stuff didn't rally. The other stuff didn't rally because Main Street is hurting. And Main Street, more retail investors, are what send the riskier stuff higher. When you're more so focused on institutions and all this other stuff, that's when the blue chips do better. So I just thought this was a cool comparison, right? To show you why retail isn't really here, right? To kind of explain, like, hey, the reason social interest is at zero, like it was back in 2019, is because Main Street's hurting. And in order for Main Street not to be hurting, we need for them not to be so worried about the labor market. We need them to not be so worried about inflation. We need lower rates, but how do you get lower rates if you have all this fiscal stimulus all the time? Like, it's a complicated problem to have. But the issue is that over a long enough period of time, the only way the politicians know to solve our issues is to print more money. So yes, are we in a downturn right now? Absolutely. Is there a chance Bitcoin could go to the 200-week moving average in 2026? Absolutely. Is that different than any other cycle we've ever had? No. Cycles like this, where retail really doesn't come back, that's this cycle teaches good investment principles, right? It's the education of look, not every cycle is going to be met with this craziness. It doesn't mean that craziness isn't going to come back. Absolutely it will, right? I mean, the bears sound smart, the bulls make money. I mean, it will come back at some point. But it's a cycle like this which teaches you good investment principles that you can carry with you for the rest of your life, right? And it's the reminder that nothing is ever promised with investing. Nothing is ever promised. Doesn't matter how many times people say things. Nothing is promised. And that's why sticking with things that that have more fundamental value are better than constantly gambling on things that require something completely out of your control. So hopefully you can at least look at this chart and it provides some type of peace as to why things have gone the way they have. And to remember that eventually times will look better and eventually things will change. But that's at least the comparison of Bitcoin with the ISM. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.